Human types, Urbanum. The best way to describe the psychosis-hylomorphism or energy type identified as Urbanum would be as a partiality or bias towards expertise and presentation. Of course, this sounds somewhat vague and universal, so it is important to understand that bias towards expertise and presentation means that it often comes at the expense of pretty much everything else. A desire to live up to the expectations of other people and of the culture as a whole by being attractive and competent and helpful and useful and cheerful.
Politics is dumb. Vote for someone who thinks politics is dumb.
It can be thought of as a feminine or extraverted energy since it is attentive towards people and the environment and often wants to be pleasing and helpful. However, since I have noticed that a lot of Gratum types, including Urbanum, often identifies with INTP and INTJ in the Myers-Briggs typology, since femininity also involves a lot of anxiety and shyness, I have stopped using extraversion as a descriptor. Usually those Gratum types that are regarded as extroverts and wants to be the center of attention, attending wild parties and similar, have Excidium in their configuration. Being immodest and outgoing requires an element of desensitization, hence why none of these energies is purely extroverted. The phenomena of extreme extraversion is the blend of specific energies. But again, it all comes down to how you choose to define extraversion, and I don't want to go into that discussion here. Anyway, the orientation towards the culture or environment leads to a desire to take part, adapt, and generally be useful or entertaining, but at the expense of being authentic and natural. Despite their often cheerful and happy moods, this is not an easygoing energy type. They take how they present themselves seriously and can become rigid and inflexible, even to the point that their self-control extends to a desire to control friends and family, so that these reflect well on them socially. They also like to package and present things and other people, not just themselves. Urbanum means metropolitan or polite and amiable, and refers to socio-oriented energy, with a focus on good presentation. An alternative name for the instinct is orationem, which means speech or eloquence, since this tends to be a highly verbal type that is good at talking.
I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Looking at its position on this conceptual map, the tool we employ to make it easier to remember the context, relation, and nature of these character phenomena, we see that Urbanum is located in the Gratum sphere in the middle motion column. Since the middle sphere also represents motion, and the other energies in the middle column have this sphere reflected in them, Urbanum, being motion, can thus be said to be the localization of the middle sphere. And since the middle sphere tends towards social agreeableness, adaptiveness, and helpfulness, it makes sense that we have the maximum of that in this particular psychosis-hylomorphism. But what is the mechanism that drives this? The Gratum sphere has been the most difficult for me to understand. By looking into other typological theories and concepts such as Jung's extraversion and the oral character in bioenergetics, the explanation tends to be that such characters focus on people and the environment because they feel incomplete or empty inside and want to fill it with external values and other people's acknowledgement, making them dependent on the outside world to feel satisfied and happy. However, this did not explain why they felt empty or needy to begin with. It was first when I started reading about the various parts of the brain, specifically the limbic system, which is the center of emotions, that I started to suspect that the main mechanism has to do with anxiety. The Gratum types are neither desensitized like the thick-skinned Morem types, nor are they able to replace life with mental richness and conceptualizations like the otherworldly sapientium types. Instead, the Gratum types are left caught in between, more sensitive and dependent on people for satisfaction, and thus forced to be more social and friendly and focused on fitting in. I also found that this theory about anxiety helps explain a lot about the two types that have the Gratum sphere reflected in them, magnitudinem and corpus, Which is why I saved these 5 types for last, and began my new presentation with those types that are not influenced by the Gratum sphere, since the Gratum sphere is more complicated. In fact, it can be difficult to perceive anxiety in Urbanum types, since they tend to have relatively high self-confidence and cheerful moods. But the more I learn about them, the more anxiety is revealed.
And that's why I think one of the most important things I've done is creating systems to handle my anxiety. So the first thing that I do is I try and meditate for 10 minutes every morning using an app called Calm. Action is the enemy of anxiety. So when you're taking action and you're doing things, that tends to shut down your anxiety. And honestly, man, I use that same technique when I'm filming videos now. A lot of times I get really anxious when I'm starting to film the video. I start overthinking all the different shots I need, but then I remind myself, yo, bro, just film the first shot, then film the second shot, because once you get that momentum and you start taking action, your mind turns off and you can just flow.
They are mostly confident to the extent that they are confident they can fit in and present themselves well, but they lack self-confidence in their authentic self. The simple fact that they spend so much energy trying to live up to people's expectations and control their behavior hints at a background of anxiety. But the limbic system is not just the center of emotions like anxiety, it is also connected with memory and learning, which may also explain why Urbanum types tend to have above average intelligence and often get good grades in school. Since they are good at adapting and imitating and mostly follows cultural authority, they are also good at becoming conventional experts within various fields. For this reason, it's not so strange that they may identify as or be regarded as intellectual types. But they are generally not interested in discussing or exchanging ideas, or enjoy ideas for their own sake, like the sapientium types. I find that they are typically poor philosophers who often dislike being asked questions, since they probably regard too many questions as a form of negativity, and Urbanum types are typically allergic to negativity. Perhaps because they don't want to be reminded of their own inner anxiety or authentic self. And because they disregard their own authentic self, they also disregard authenticity in other people, focusing more on helping others present themselves in attractive ways and live up to social expectations as well. Despite their social verbal aspect, it is not always easy to find famous examples of Urbanum types. People often become famous because they go against norms and cultural trends, not following them. There are many American presidents and presidential candidates that have been Urbanums, but they usually have Excidium in their configuration. Meritumic Urbanums tend to become medical doctors or get involved with coaching. Corpusic Urbanums tend to focus more on entertainment, such as becoming a singer or model or actress. Although Urbanum can be considered the localization of the feminine sphere, because the types in this sphere seem to be more common among women, Urbanum women often take on a stronger woman role, especially in science fiction, compared to libidinum and misericordiam women. Some examples are Carrie Fisher, who played Princess Leia, Gillian Anderson, who played Dr. Dana Scully, Claudia Black, who played the soldier Aronson in Farscape, and Maggie Q, who played Nikita in the 2010 TV series. Of course, some strong women are played by Meritum women, such as Sigourney Weaver or other types, but Urbanum often look more like libidinum, since they are in the same sphere. In the attempt to live up to other people's expectations, Urbanum types can become trapped in a stressful cycle of frivolous production that deep down don't really make them happy, as has been expressed by many Urbanum types on YouTube.
It really affected me last year, and one of the big things, besides personal problems that affected me, was the fact that I couldn't be honest about things I disliked. I really hated myself and was disgusted with myself when I sat and, looked at myself, analyzed how I am on YouTube.
I thought that for people to want to watch my videos, I would have to be happy. I would have to force positivity. Forcing positivity is fucking exhausting. There were times where I recorded myself playing video games, absolutely hating the game, and just forcing that I would enjoy it. Just pretending that I'm having fun.
Other times they paradoxically get so focused on goals and living up to them that they almost become workaholic loners. It is very difficult to have a real connection with someone if you are so focused on living up to an ideal image or expectations that you don't have time to be present in the moment and be genuine. The result is a difficult energy to describe, that is feminine and yet confident, that is anxious yet cheerful, that is intelligent yet superficial, that is attentive towards the environment and other people, yet ends up occupied with a lot of work on their own. The spiritual problem for Urbanum tends to be a loss of authenticity, loss of depth, loss of relaxation, and loss of contact with personal values in favor of fitting in and be useful, enjoyable, or helpful to others. The spiritual strength is having socially good intentions, similar to meritum and corpus, with a lot of energy, often able to spread joy and friendliness.